Hi, I'm Carrie, a stroke survivor and a member of Bind.
And I'm Kezia, a stroke survivor and member of Bind as well. And today, on this Thursday, we actually have our new guest, which we're excited to welcome, named Karol Falci, who is a medical social worker and case manager at Neuro in Frisco for Baylor Scott and White. And today she's going to be here talking to us about and continue the conversation about our day-to-day life and the resources we have. So welcome to the podcast, Karol.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me.
Welcome to Bindwaves, the official podcast of the Brain Injury Network of Dallas. I'm Brian White, Bind's Executive Director. On each episode, we'll be providing insight into the brain injury community. We'll be talking to members and professionals regarding their stories and the important role of Bind's Clubhouse. We work as a team to inspire hope, community, and a sense of purpose to survivors, caregivers, and the public. Thank you for tuning into Bindwaves. Let's get on with the show.
We're glad you're here. So we normally just start the conversation so that our guests tell us a little bit about yourself so that we get to meet you and then also our listeners. So can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yes, absolutely. I've lived in Texas for 28 years. I was born and raised in the Northeast, but I've been in the case management social work field for over 20 years. I have 2 daughters, 1 grandson. Not sure if you wanted personal or professional information.
Whatever you want to share.
Okay.
Yeah.
But I have worked in different venues. I've worked with special needs kiddos. I've worked with mentally ill population. And then most of my case management social work has been in the medical field. And most recently, the last 5 years, doing brain injury. That's pretty much about me.
Oh, that's great. Again, we're glad you're here. We're glad to have you. I think one of the first questions it is because, like, I know these terms. Well, one, I know social worker because my dad is a retired social worker. So I've known kind of what a social worker was my whole life, but he always worked in more mental health. So he couldn't share stuff. So I never thought to ask, what is a social worker? But that's just, and then when you get into the medical side, as a survivor, we hear this term case manager. So I think the first question for me, for our listeners, for our members, what is the difference? Is there a difference between social worker or case manager?
That's a great question. And being a social work / case manager, it is very confusing because back when I guess I first got my degree, everybody was just a social worker. And that entailed more like what you're talking about, more socioeconomic or mental health, behavioral health type things. Over the years, it's definitely changed. They have, especially in the medical setting, a lot of RNs became what they call case managers. So we overlapped quite a bit. Like when I worked in the hospital, we had a team consisting of case managers and social workers. So the social worker side of it that I handled was more of the helping people get resources in the community, helping families that are in crisis. The case manager side of it was more medical, helping hook them up with more medically complex needs, as well as understanding more about the insurance. That has definitely morphed a little bit into combining those roles. So like the role that I'm currently in, I'm called a case manager, but I always put / social worker because I feel like that's where my heart is at. But so I do have to know a lot more about the insurance side of it so that I can help my teams with, just ongoing therapies, things like that. Families have questions now. Years ago we didn't really think about insurance as a patient. You just got what you needed, but it's definitely changed over the years. So I know that's a long answer, but it's become almost the same title. It's just that there are RNs and there are people like myself that are just social workers, but most places call us case managers or sometimes care coordinators.
Okay. I can see like how the difference can be in you had just also told us that you've been at Baylor Scott and White for 5 years doing the case manager / social worker. I think that also plays a role what we think about acute when we're in the hospital and how different that is compared to day neuro. But can you explain that as well, like what the differences are for case managers and social workers to be working in those settings?
Sure, absolutely. So when we say acute care setting, we're looking at a more short-term stay. Like you think of someone comes in maybe through the emergency room, they need surgery, or they get diagnosed with something life-changing. So they get their direct care right then, in the hospital, whether it be medication, surgeries, things like that. It's usually a short stay. And then they go on to either like some type of rehab, whether it be physical rehab, or like our program, like a day neuro program, which is much more long-term. So the acute care setting is definitely more of the immediate, quick, what are we facing right now needs, whereas the the day neuro setting is more of the longer term needs and things like that. Our patients, the average short stay is about 12 weeks, and we have some that stay up to 6 months or more.
Wow. So I guess then the next question is, so you mentioned a little bit about insurance and then just other needs. So I guess the easy way to do it, to answer the question or ask the question is like, on a day-to-day, what do you as a case manager / social worker do for the people in day neuro?
That definitely varies.
Of course, every brain injury varies, so we know it's not set for one person.
No.
We understand that.
The boring side of it is I do a lot of paperwork. I do a lot of care planning, things like that, make sure all the documents are where they're supposed to be so that when we meet as teams, we can plug in information. The more, what I call fun side of it is everything from coordinating like care in the community, like maybe a patient is discharged and they need to see a neurologist. That's a very common thing. And it might take 3 months to see a neurologist. So I'm going to be working on their behalf, to try and get them in somewhere quicker. I also maybe will have to understand their insurance a little bit, to kind of guide them to that. So it's everything from that, which can seem mundane, but when you're overwhelmed and you're trying to get lots of appointments and the families, in a pretty overwhelmed state, and they've gone through a lot the last few months usually, just anything like that is helpful to them. Something from that to maybe they're having trouble getting food, they can't afford some of the basic necessities, having resources that they can go to, writing letters. So it's a lot of patient advocacy and kind of connecting, and that's the side I enjoy more. But unfortunately, because of insurance and things like that and regulations, I do have that big side of, lots of paperwork, which also helps the patient, but it's not as direct.
Yeah, and right now that you're mentioning that it's not as direct, I like how you've mentioned sharing the resources and stuff, because maybe at that point we're not at that level yet to be an advocate for ourselves or know when we need resources. So I started picturing like how the possibilities you're doing this for caregivers. Is this what you offer to them, like as family members, friends, or caregivers? If so, like, is there anything else?
Absolutely, yes, absolutely. And that's another thing I love about our program. And that is a huge difference between acute care too. Usually acute care, you're focusing on the patient probably 90%. By the time they come to us, I tell families it's a family event. Somebody in the family had an event and it has changed their life, and it has affected everybody that touches their life, friends, family, co-workers, whatever it might be. But absolutely, a lot of times the patient doesn't even know what they need, and then family's not too far behind in the sense of they're just trying to get some normalcy, and they haven't had any for so long, so they're not quite sure. They're dealing with emotions, fears, just lots of things coming at them, and also maybe paperwork that is just daunting.
Yeah.
So it could be something as simple as sitting down with a patient and calling an employer, and working through some of the questions that they need to ask. And then same thing with family members. Like I said, a lot of times family members have been through a lot by the time they reach us.
Okay, sure, that's great. I'm going to take one quick little break and remind our listeners to go ahead and click that like button, click that share button, and click that notify button if you're on YouTube. Like I always say, click the buttons. But thanks, Karol. Sorry for the interruption. But I like what you're saying because we talk about that a lot. People think, oh, you had a brain injury. Well, too bad for you. People don't realize that it's the entire family has had the brain injury. It's not just the survivor. They all have to go through. There's so much that's not just patient advocacy, but caregiver advocacy. And we've been talking a lot about that this season. So I'm glad to get that out there because more people need to know they're not alone. But I guess kind of back on you and being a social worker. When you started, you said you were in lots of different fields. What got you interested in getting involved with the brain injury community?
It was kind of by accident. I found a passion. I loved working in acute care, but after a while, you just feel like I need a change. So I saw an opening at Baylor Rehab in Frisco, and it was in the inpatient side. So I interviewed, and during the interview, they talked about this day neuro program that was a little bit newer and up and coming, and would I be interested in learning both roles? And I was like, sure. And I knew nothing about the brain injured population at that point. Started to kind of research it, and as luck would have it, the person that was heading that program, the social worker, went out on maternity leave only maybe a month into my coming on board. So I took over, and I never left. That was almost 6 years ago, 5.5 years ago. So I just, I really found a passion there, and I just started to educate myself more, and I love how I have a longer interaction with patients and get to see, much more of their journey and be with them on that journey.
I love that. I was trying to figure out if I have met you before, but right now they said you were 5.5 years ago. I went to Baylor Frisco for like a very short time, and I was like, I wonder if I had met
funny.
you, but maybe
You never
You never know.
know.
You never know.
Small world.
But I like that. I like that you didn't know too much about brain community and brain injury survivors, and I like that you were able to see the process, because we're not the same person when we first started rehabilitation till the end of the 6 months, year or year and a half, like me. I was there for a while. So I love that. But did you experience anything unique that you might not have experienced any other, like any of the other experience you had as a social worker?
Sure. I guess the most unique thing would be just watching the process, seeing sometimes somebody come in, because I meet all the new admits that are on my teams. We have 2 social workers now, and sometimes the person sitting in the room with me is barely speaking, and I think just watching them, throughout the process, that to me is the most rewarding and the most unique. I've never been able to do that. Like, I would work with patients in the acute care setting, and off they would go, and I would wonder about them. I would think about them. I would, but never really ever knew anything. And then to see them, we do a little clap out, and they wear a little lei at the end. And, and we have a little certificate that people sign, or we do words of encouragement. And sometimes it just, there's usually lots of tears, because just seeing the difference, in the person from maybe when they sat, in front of me to when they're walking out that door. It's that's probably the most unique thing that I've found in this setting.
Yeah, I can totally relate to that. That's one of the fun things about being here at Bind is we stay connected with all the therapists. Like the lady that founded Bind was a speech therapist at the day neuro program I was in, and now our program director she wasn't in the day neuro, but she was a therapist at the inpatient side of the hospital I was in. So, I see all my therapists now. So it's fun. I call them, I'm like, can I have you on the podcast? Can you do this for me? I need help.
Right.
So it's kind of fun, because I know that's got to be hard as a therapist, as a case manager, to go, I wonder whatever happened to that patient, and never get to know again. So, Now, we talked about what's unique, so now we're going to throw you a curveball.
Okay.
What makes being a social worker, case manager to the brain injury community so challenging?
Oh boy, that's an easy answer though, actually.
Oh, good.
Yeah, because in the state of Texas, it's resources. We have a great need for more resources for the brain injured population. We really do. When I first started out in this role, I would be researching something, and I would be like, oh my gosh, there's this program or there's that program. And I'd get super excited, and then the more I would go down that little rabbit hole, I'd find out, oh, this is in Utah or Minnesota or something, not in Texas. So I would definitely say the biggest challenge is resources. We just have, that's why I love Bind. We talk about you guys all the time. We send people if we can, because people still have so much to give and to give back, and they maybe can't go back to the original roles they had before, but that doesn't mean they're done with life, and there's just not enough resources in this state. We just don't seem to recognize that population in the way that we should. So.
Yeah, I love that you're promoting us. But also, I think it's like an easy way to see like the positive and the negative at the same time, right? Like, there is a lack of resources in Texas, and I believe all over the United States, right? Like, there's just a difficulty. But at the same time, there's really great programs that can help people in the way that they need it, right? I actually see it very difficult to be in a rehabilitation where, like, you're not saying that they're ready, right? It's like the insurance that's saying that that's about it, so it is difficult for sure to let someone go when you know that you could probably do more. I see that. But then you have programs so that they could do the next step. But do you have like any like really successful story that you would like to share to our listeners? Because sometimes I think that that's the stories that they need, right? Like what happened that makes me feel like motivational, or like something that I can do that I'm not the only one. Yeah.
I think the one that comes to mind is a younger gentleman, obviously for HIPAA we can't.
Sure.
But we had a younger gentleman that continues to have pretty severe aphasia, was very young, and just really wanted to get back to some of the basics of life, driving, being able to go through a drive-through and order food. I mean, just what we would think of as simple when we haven't had, a brain injury, and just being able to work again in some capacity. And that really, I think the family did not ever expect that. Their expectations were very, very low. Of course, we always say we're just going to, do as much as we can. We keep plugging through. He was very fortunate in what you're talking about, in that his insurance was very generous, and he went through our program for a very long time, and then went through our aphasia program. We have a small program, and and it was just recent, and it's been over a year, probably a year and maybe 4 months, but he was driving. He shared with some of the other newer patients, which I know very much encouraged them, because there were people there that were like, I just didn't even think I could drive, and it's like, I look at him and I know I can. And so he went back to driving. He practiced and learned some of his favorite fast foods and other places to be able to order food. He started working a little bit again. It won't be in the same capacity, but he definitely was using like a texting program that was unique to him. And I guess it was about a week before his discharge, which, like I said, it was probably 18 months. He said his first full sentence, and one of our counselors was like, I was tearful, and it was beautiful. It was incredible. And I think that gave a lot of the other patients in the aphasia program just a lot of hope, as well as all of our patients when he shared about driving, what he could share about driving.
Yeah. I love that you shared that story. I love it, because that's kind of what we're trying to this year to really talk about, and let our listeners understand that maybe we didn't have a huge change in our lives, but these changes in our day-to-day life make a huge impact on us.
Yes.
Even if he couldn't have full conversations, he was able to get his freedom back and his independence, and these may not seem as a huge success, but to us, and on both sides, right? As a social worker and as a therapist that do this work, it's a huge success for you guys.
Very much a huge success.
Yeah, that's amazing.
We talk a lot about a new normal, and
it's,
it doesn't have to be the same, but it still can be normal for you, and it still can be fulfilling and enjoyable. And, I think the key is just not giving up. And that's what I tell my patients the most, is just keep doing, keep trying, keep plugging, don't, I think I shared with you earlier that I had a stroke, and I got to be on the other side of that. So I get what that feels like, to be done with the program and think, oh, well, this is it. And I could see where you could tell yourself that, and then you start to do more, and you just need to keep moving forward.
Absolutely. That's what we try to share with all our listeners, is that, the little steps they may be little, but they're huge to us, just those little steps. Because, getting back to driving for me was a huge one.
Yes.
But kind of speaking about that, like once they discharge, and this is where I don't want to misspeak, so I may be wrong, but one of our guests, I'm not going to name names, so I don't say her name. I said something, she said something wrong. But she mentioned, because again, we're trying to talk about things for our everyday life, but maybe there's some things that you didn't know you needed or need help with after you've discharged and now you're at home. And we were talking actually about driving, and she mentioned something about there was like a social worker assigned to each county that you could reach out to and get help from. Is there something like that we don't know about that we even here at Bind could add as a resource to our stuff? Because, I mean, that would be awesome if it is. Because a lot of times, you don't know what you need till you need it. And that may not happen during even something as extensive as day neuro.
Right. I'm not aware of that or a program like that. The only thing I could think of is the work program. If somebody is signed up with that, they will have a case manager that follows them even after discharge, and that goes by county and cities and things like that. So they may be.
You're talking about the Texas Workforce Commission, okay? Yeah,
like maybe Texas Workforce. But I always tell my patients, and they could probably always just reach back to if they were in a program and ask. I love to share resources. I'm always happy to do that, with my folks. But you're right. I don't know that there's anybody specifically that they could, tap into. But the Brain Injury Network, maybe that's you guys probably know about that as well.
A program I should give to O&A to have them start researching
the Brain Injury Network. Yeah, they have. They seem to have a lot of resources. It can be time consuming, to kind of follow down those rabbit trails. But I know they do have lots of resources there. So. But I do have patients who will call back sometimes months later, and I'm happy to hook them up with whatever I know. So.
Yeah, I love that. I know very briefly, and I do want to thank you for sharing that your details that you too had a stroke. I mean, it's a table. Stroke. Yeah. I couldn't even say that word. Interesting. Yeah, I couldn't even say that. Like all women, like stroke survivors. I think that's very powerful. Yeah. And I think, obviously, Carrie and I didn't know until you walked into the studio. We were here like talking about your career, but your experience as well. I mean, that's amazing as a stroke survivor, and also with your experience working as a social worker and care manager. Do you have any tips to our listeners? A lot of them are stroke survivors or caregivers that experience this, or ideally, same with the medical resources that are also listening to us to learn about us. Would you like to share any tips or like any motivational words for them?
I think just relaying back to what I said earlier as far as survivors is, don't put yourself in a box. Don't tell yourself, oh, I don't think I can do that, or I can't do that anymore, or I can't do, just always say, I'm going to try. It might look different. I went snorkeling with friends, and I can't swim since my stroke. I just don't have that coordination any longer. And I remember I was on the boat, and I said, I can't snorkel. And my friend's like, what do you mean you can't snorkel? I'm like, well, I can't swim, and, it'll just be weird. And, and she was like, no. And, like, one person took one side, and then I was able to get the other going. And, I mean, I snorkeled for, 2 hours. I had a blast. And I thought that was my first inkling, like, stop putting yourself in a box and telling yourself that there's things you can't do. Figure out ways around it. And so that would be I think the thing that I would say to survivors. I mean, they told me that I might not work again, I was just very fortunate, but, and I know not everybody has the outcome I have, but I think that's part of it. Is I think your rehab happens between your ears a lot. So don't limit yourself. And as far as family, or I guess maybe loved ones, or just ask questions, don't assume. I had people assume a lot of things about what I was thinking or how I was feeling or what I needed or didn't need, and I think it would have gone a long way if people had just asked more questions and not been afraid to do that. And as far as, I guess, maybe other professionals, I think we just need to have more empathy to really realize it's like what I told somebody, it's like going to sleep at one age and waking up at another. That's how I felt, if all of a sudden my body was not my body, and I equate it to aging. As we age, we're going to change, things are going to get, so just I think more empathy for sure.
I love that. And I also love what you were saying about keep trying. We kind of have a saying around here. It's not I can't, it's I can't yet.
I love that.
So there you go. And again, we want to thank you so much for joining us, Karol. I've loved this conversation. I've loved getting to know you a little bit better, more than just through email. It's always nice to meet people in person. So again, we appreciate you taking the time to visit us.
Absolutely.
And we thanks to all of our listeners for listening.
And of course, I want to thank you again. Of course, to all of our listeners, if you want to contact us or our guests, make sure to just email us at bindwaves@thebind.org. We normally do also have the resource emails or any contact information down below in our description. And also follow us on Instagram if you don't already. And if you do, tell other people to copy you and follow Bindwaves. And visit our website, which is thebind.org/bindwaves.
And once again, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe on whatever your favorite platform is. Again, hit that notify button on YouTube so that you can continue listening to Bindwaves.
Every Thursday, if you don't know already, make sure to listen to the new episodes on all of your platforms. So until next time.
Until next time. We hope you've enjoyed listening to Bindwaves and continue to support Bind and our nonprofit mission.
We support brain injury survivors as they reconnect into the life, the community, and their workplace.
And we couldn't do that without great listeners like you. We appreciate each and every one of you. Continue watching. Until next time.
Until next time.